Okay. Well, listen, thanks for agreeing to have a chat with me. I really appreciate it, Amy.
My pleasure.
And I think when we first spoke on the phone, obviously, I was kind of struck by how relevant your experience is at this moment in time to a lot of people, especially in retail. And so I've spent many years talking to people in data analysis and quantitative analysis, but I'll be honest with you, I've not spoken to many people with your particular skill set. So do you want to just give me a bit of an overview of sort of what you do sort of day to day, Amy?
Sure. So the thing that I've always kind of explained to companies or to my parents, both are hard audiences sometimes, is I spend a lot of time on the outside world and bring that in. So that's through a lot of observation, through photographing and talking to people and kind of seeing the lay of the land, either through a consumer's viewpoint, speaking with them as to, what are the current realities of their life. And then it kind of drills down on a specific project. So, the landscape changes all the time. It could be an automotive client that's wanting to know, what does the future of our business look like in terms of, the dealership, or what does the future of meat look like? And, we see this uptick in veganism, but is it going to translate into, the shopping habits longer term if we're doing a big investment or a pivot? So I get asked broad questions on like really interesting topics. They always change across all sectors. I've worked on most. And I tend to be curious on behalf of a brand. And, they have their data, they have they have the internal, I bring in the external.
Okay, right.
So that you can marry the two, because the data, that's important. That's, that's
absolutely.
That's the heartbeat of what's going on within your business. But there's reasons for those. So if you see that uptick of, in the case of right now, eBay saw, a 1900% increase in searches for dumbbells. Well, that's relevant to the, within culture, what's going on is that people can't access the gym. And so this is, there's reasons behind the data, and you kind of need to, look at both sides, I think. And we're getting very reliant on data to tell us everything, but sometimes you need to, first of all, be able to know what you're looking for within the data, which a lot of teams don't necessarily know. But, that quant culture perspective, consumer perspective, that voice is just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about understanding why it's happening, and then what brands can do to react to that, basically, and be almost one step ahead of the game.
Yes.
And I guess right now, with everything that's going on in the world, that's more relevant now than ever.
Sure.
And so for you, Amy, I was looking at your profile, and your background's really interesting. It's fascinating. So if I get this right, you're a qualitative researcher. You've got 10 years experience, and you've worked with massive brands. So I'll just reel off a few of them. So Target, Adidas, Facebook, Google, Unilever, Bang & Olufsen, Nando's, Muller, Diageo, Volkswagen. I mean, that is an impressive list. And in addition to that, you've traveled to 60 different countries. You've lived in 6 of them, and you've worked in 6 of these countries. I mean, that is a really impressive skill set and background, and some really big names there.
Can I just tell you, I used to never tell anybody about the countries. Like, I was like, oh, that there's a point where you don't want to sound like you're like bragging. So I never used to put that. And I went, if I'm saying that what I do is represent and look in culture, then I should probably share that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's really relevant right now. The world is getting smaller, but culture is really important. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about, your current situation, because you're in Berlin at the moment. Is that right?
Yep.
And in Berlin, in Germany, the retailers opened a few weeks ago.
Yes.
next week here in the UK, British retailers are going to be reopening. What should we expect here in the UK, and what's happened so far in Berlin right now? Well, what's happening in Germany?
So it's been about 3 weeks for Berlin in particular, and Germans by nature are quite law abiding. So there was a ready audience that was willing to accept parameters, and there are parameters. You know, dependent on store size, there's only so many people that can come in. So foot traffic is greatly affected. You know, it's not uncommon to see, you know, huge lines down the block. Those lines have shifted. You know, in the beginning, there was the excitement of like, it's open, let's go in and explore.
Yeah.
But I like to say, like, the retail romance part has died a bit, because when you take away, for instance, I was incredibly excited to go to TK Maxx. That's a favorite. And you can purchase online. They don't have a big e-com presence. And because they focus so much on the safety aspect, they, you know, stopped playing music. The product had, a lot of it had been canceled because they didn't know when they were going to open. And so there was this feeling of a bit of disappointment that there just wasn't, there's this expectation of it's going to be back to what it was. I'm not going to say the word normal, because I think I'm trying to stay away from new normal and old normal. So understand that your customer still has this fantasy a little bit about what it was. And you have to kind of be willing to take them on the journey to what is now. And the fact, you can be honest with them that this is trial, you're trialing, and explain things. So I know that within the UK, there's some choices that some retailers are going to open change rooms and some are going to not. Because the reason is that any product that is tried on, it either has to be steam cleaned or it has to go into storage for 3 days, because there's regulations around that. So that means that, you know, shopping habits and how much you try on, all of those things start to become affected. You know, say you're a makeup counter, you can't try on product anymore.
Yeah.
So there's limitations when, you know, retail itself has been struggled. We've seen what's been happening on the high street, and this is just like, oh, it's this extra layer. And for many, you know, the balance of the e-com was the in-store experience, but a lot of that is now going to be removed. Like you're not encouraged to stay long because you want foot traffic, because you're only allowed to have 25% of the people that you normally would have had 100. So you want the churn, you need to get them in and out quickly. You can't touch anything, and you don't want them necessarily to loiter. So it's a whole shifting parameter of what it's going to feel like. But there are brands like Selfridges. I think that's a really great best of class to look at what they're going to be doing, is because they're having entertainment to kind of, you know, make standing in line a bit more fun. They have late night shopping options, or they've, you know, shifted some of their a lot of their offering within e-com. You know, they doubled their sales, but they're rejigging in real time what that experience is going to look like. And I think a lot of retailers need to be willing to, first of all, express safety. You know, that's the core basic. That's the hygiene. But don't lose the other aspects of the parts of why people come into store. You know, that's going to be a work in progress, and it's going to take time. And certain categories we know are going to take longer to recover. You know, weddings have stopped. You know, the need for formal wear is just not going to be there. Or vacations, you know, we're not needing 5 swimsuits to go to Ibiza because we're not going. But then other categories, the flip side, you know, like home cooking has like completely surged, or the staycation. Like if you were in the tent and outdoor business, like this is a really good time to be you. So categories change, but how you interact and communicate with your consumer to make that experience in store feel like it was worth, you know, coming out and doing that journey, in terms of either from safety perspective or just time, because a lot of people are balancing having to take care of families too. So their time is much more limited. And, to also just not make the assumption that different age groups, you can't really market to just go like, well, Gen Zs, they're going to be fine with this, because as somebody said once, we've gone through this hurricane, and how we're experiencing the hurricane is incredibly different. Some people are going through a rainstorm, and some people, it's been a light shower. So you can't look at your demographic, market in the same way, because you could have somebody that was young that lost a grandparent and is gonna, so it's a really fascinating time as to, how you view your customer base, because you have to look at it through a bit more empathy than we've ever had to before.
So what, for you then, what are the key learnings that you've observed in Germany that, the retail market here in the UK can benefit from or learn from?
I think the willingness to go with what the seasons are. So because so many people curbed their product, still be willing to bring in a refreshment so it doesn't feel like you've come into a time capsule. That's been a big problem, where there's just a lot of stock that they need to get rid of. And so it's become almost like a clearance feeling. So still be willing to curate a bit. Really think about all the touch points. And the touch points doesn't start from your store. It actually starts from waiting outside. Are there umbrellas, or how do you, is there coverings? How do you, could you have conversation starters that you could talk to somebody 2 feet away from, how can you just make that a much more enjoyable experience instead of an hour wait time? Safety still is key. And then within Germany specifically, just be willing to realize that there's not a huge appetite to go back, and that's going to take time. When I go into malls, there's still a lot of empty space, and it's not just because of numbers being diminished in terms of who can come in. There are a lot of people that just don't want to come in. So I think there's realistic sense. We know that you're aching for this, for a return. But it's a longer journey than I think we realize.
Yeah. And have you got any examples of sort of big brands that, we can kind of take some guidance or inspiration from, that are doing things right?
I think they're all really within the trial space. That's a harder question. That one I would struggle with.
Okay.
Because
I guess there are some brands that are very big here in the UK. So we've seen our the B&Qs, Tesco, where it's kind of like you're going into these stores and they're actually selling a lot of different products. But then does that mean that the specialist stores are going to potentially lose out when they open, because actually we've all got used to going to Tesco and buying everything, for example?
I think it depends on how you view local and what you want to support. From a consumer perspective, what someone wrote, it was on Instagram or something, the companies that you support now are the ones that are going to remain. And so, yes, there's fiscal realities, but consumers are still making those choices as to who they want to support. I don't think everybody wants just a Tesco on every corner. So, I think there is hope for other retailers if this assortment remains interesting enough that you want to come in and explore it.
Yeah. And so from a data point of view then, talk me through your process in terms of collecting that data, and then what do you do with it?
So it depends, but the core thing has always been is the gathering of working on like multiple, because I've worked on so many different categories through the years. So there's this data bank, and I always utilize a cross sector. So what is something that we've learned from FMCG that could be then brought into a different market, because those learnings are just as important. So there's a lot of desk research. There's a lot of just accumulation of information. And then I'm always looking for like really interesting experts that can share some really important aspects within a client specific industry. You know, I worked on a future of travel project recently with the Visa Innovation Lab, and I brought in someone whose his family had been within travel for 50 years, and they helped Mao, you know, make the decisions as to, you know, how do you bring tourism into China. So looking for like really interesting people that they might not necessarily have access to whenever possible, to bring in leading edge consumers so that they can have real-time access with them, to have conversations and potentially use them as like a bounce back for ideas of products they're working on. So it's the combination of just a lot of inspiration, I would say. It could be from a physical product. So, you know, I traveled the world for Target looking for interesting products and licensing opportunities. Met them in a secret room every 3 months. It was the best job ever. You know, the secret room was a big deal because you couldn't have somebody from Walmart spy. Like this, you know, sometimes, you know, some of the things we would bring, they would turn into something that is worth millions to the business. So the secret room was important. So it can be, you know, from a physical thing to just monitoring. You know, for Unilever, it was around 4 categories that they're very interested in, you know, keeping a pulse on. You know, what was going on within sustainability? You know, what were conversations or new products being developed? And so that would be reported back to their global teams. So I would say I work with a brand to figure out what they need to know. And then I'm cognizant of how far advanced they need to know. Yeah. So with an automotive client, most of them are legacy employees. They stick around. They're going to be there for like 10 years. But for an FMCG, you know, product manager or, you know, brand manager, it's 2 to 3 years. So if I'm not going to show them something that's like 5 years from now. It's really about keeping what's current within culture, and then the shifts that they can do something, they can take it. It's the so what of, you know, is this actually relevant to my customer? You know, I don't give trends for trends' sake. So
when we talk about trends, then, you know, what are the sort of fads versus the trends that have been brought on by the pandemic? You mentioned earlier about outdoor goods. What else are we seeing?
So I think anything to do with personal fitness, that's definitely going to continue to rise, because we're just not going to have the same access to gyms and how we work out. So any of that. I think we are tech saturated. So any type of family activities that become more high touch. You know, we've seen, it was like an 800% increase within eBay for puzzles. You know, what are things that you can do with your family that isn't screen time, because so much of our life is based on screen time. You know, anything to do around cooking, I think, will remain. It's really fascinating to track what people were buying through different stages. So in the beginning, it was all about toilet paper. and then you got to a point where like yeast, because people wanted to bake. And then people needed to cut their hair. So you saw like an 1800% increase in, you know, interest in home, you know, cutting type stuff, like to be your own hairdresser. So I think that feels more like fad. That was more around a necessity to meet a need that you couldn't meet anymore. Yeah. But I think anything to do with shifts around home and space, you know, if we're going to be working in our homes more, what does that look like in terms of our wardrobes, how we outfit our space? There's been a lot of Zoom envy of apartments. You know, the New York Times has an article based only on like assessing people's bookshelves, like celebrities, and they'll point out like what books people read. So, you know, homeware, you know, having a really great office chair, people are starting to realize what's worth an investment in terms of health. Yeah. And I think anything to do around health in terms of mindfulness, or, you know, anything within that space, that I don't think that's going away. It's worth the investment.
Yeah. And so thinking back to your career, where you've worked in the past, you know, what's the most memorable job or project that you've worked on?
Okay, this can be, I don't know if you're going to like this, but this is one that I'm very proud of. So I lived in New York for about 10 years, but at one point during my career, I needed a new visa. And I went to an immigration lawyer and he said, you as a consultant don't bring any value to the US because that's just that's not an easy visa to get. But if you can create a company that's going to employ Americans, come back to me. Okay. So at the time, I was working with Target and I was monitoring the uptick in interest within home eco-friendly products. And there was like huge surge. And then Oprah had a vibrator on television, which was like massive. Like that was huge. That was like monumental. And then there was an article about
the vibrator was huge, or the actual thing.
I know, it could be either. And then there was an article talking about how if you left a plastic water bottle within a car, you shouldn't drink it because it leaches and there's chemical leaching. So I saw these pinpoints. This is how my brain works. So this is why I use this example of different conversations that were taking place, but I went, oh, there's an opportunity. And so I created an eco-friendly sex toy brand and I got the visa for 4 years. And when I would tell like other immigration lawyers, they'd be like, I don't know how you got that visa. But it was a solution to a problem. And it's kind of how I approach most of my work is looking at things from incredibly different angles that you may not necessarily have thought of, and bringing those pieces together. And so that's one I'm always really proud of. And I can talk about anything,
Is that something that you're particularly proud of as well then?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been, because there's been so many topics that I've worked on, it's the ability to go, I'm not an expert in your industry, but I can learn really quickly. And the amount of times I've stood up and gone, like, I can't tell this category things about their category. They know everything and they don't. They know about their brand. And you need somebody from the outside to bring in that outside perspective. That's the whole point.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So basically you've worked primarily for big media, advertising, brand agencies, or the brands themselves directly, or has it been a bit of a mix?
Bit of a mix. So it's either directly with a brand working on a specific challenge, or through an agency where I've either been kind of the hub, the engine for the cultural insights, where it kind of leads to supporting new business initiatives, keeping clients abreast of things that are going on, fueling the creative departments in terms of insights and inspiration or strategic division. So,
excuse me, Amy, my dog is trying to get out of the room. Typically, bear with me one second.
Don't worry.
We can edit this in the cut.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to go out? There you go. Nothing out there. Dearie me. Right. Where were we? So we were talking about the work that you do, and obviously with ERG we're data and IT tech recruiters. So what should companies be looking at now in terms of tech? And talking about TK Maxx as an example, is this now a kind of a black swan moment or a proper paradigm shift where everybody's got to go online and have something, some sort of web presence now? I guess it's a no-brainer, surely.
It becomes the standard, almost like that hygiene level. Like, yes, but there are so much complexities depending on your business. So for instance, Primark lost $650 million, a month. And their business model is not meant for e-com. So same with TK Maxx. They don't have SKUs. The box arrives at the store. That's part of their essence as a brand, is its discovery. You're not going to know what you're going to get. Neither do the employees. So within those two kind of more outlier examples, they can't pivot. And just because you've opened an e-com presence doesn't necessarily mean you've done it really well. The experience level that people have this expectation of in store needs to be brought in within different ways into an online experience.
Yeah.
How do you bring in expertise? So for instance, John Lewis partnered with the National Ballet in order to be trained. So they brought in theater professors, theater experts to train their personal shopping people.
Oh, right. Okay.
And they saw a huge uptick in sales. But like, you need to then convert what that feels like in store also into in person, into an online experience. So I think we're in a playing time where it's a good time to trial and see, but don't make it all functional.
Yeah.
Because in some cases you can't necessarily deliver. There's been huge problems with shipment, and how do you continue to express that? So all of those components. So yes, you have to be, but do you have the capacity? Ocado at one point, they stopped accepting customers because they couldn't promise delivery. So just because you have it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to service those customers too. So
Right.
can you match demand? And some of this demand is unprecedented. So there wasn't systems in place to address it. And I don't think all of the numbers are going to stay the same. Not everybody's wanting to have an e-com experience, and not everybody feels comfortable within that process. So there is a balance, because people do miss people. There's delight of, why do we have a high street? It's the enjoyment of going. It just happens that in this moment of time, what you're selling is non-enjoyment. Selfridges is trying to sell enjoyment, and like, that's a great one to look at how that works for them. Because if you just focus on the functionality in both sectors, either from the e-com or in store, you're going to lose people, because the reason to buy isn't very enticing at the moment for a lot of people. The fiscal realities of families has been incredibly damaged. And I think it depends on where you are within the country too. Do you have fear of what comes next? So you wanting to save more, we are going into recession.
Yeah.
That's a reality.
Yeah. And so, summing up then, what would be one piece of advice that every retailer now should know?
I think be willing to, it's a horrible thing to say, but it's going to take time. I mean, it's the most common thing. And that when you're looking at your data, don't just make all decisions within that. So meaning, okay, so nobody's buying anything. Let's curb all purchases and let's just like rein back everything, and we'll just sell what we have. From a customer, that's a very unappealing product offering to see things from Easter. Just because you stopped in Easter doesn't mean my brain is still in Easter. So, look what's going on in culture and see where there's upticks, and be willing to potentially pivot what those products look like. So for instance, okay, get rid of the Easter stuff. We know you want to sell it, but like, the interest might be more in camping. And so that product offering has to reflect in real time what your customer wants to buy instead of what you want to sell. Because what you might want to sell right now is your stock, because you're at a deficit. We get that. Customer doesn't get that. It's not what they want right now.
Amy, it's been brilliant to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Obviously, we're going to be trying to help you find your next role. And it could be in London or Berlin. Is that right? Or
open to both.
Open to both. Okay. Listen, Amy, thanks very much indeed for taking the time. It is appreciated. It's obviously unprecedented times right now, but I think we'll get through it. And I'm sure that we can help you find your next role soon.
Great. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Right, I've clicked